Hey guys, welcome back to Human Condition. This video is sort of a philosophy video, but I didn't categorize it in the philosophy series, but it is, what is absolute idealism? This should be a pretty interesting one. When I first heard of this philosophy, my mind was kind of blown, not gonna lie. It's pretty crazy. This one is a pretty deep and interesting philosophy. And I'd say I agree with this probably like 80% philosophy. There's some things I disagree with in this philosophical view. Absolute idealism suggests that reality is linked with consciousness, and that not just our consciousness, like subjective idealism, but there's an overall consciousness that reality is linked to, and this overall consciousness is reality itself, but reality relies on this consciousness, so it's kind of like a little confusing. When I first heard this, I was like, mine was kind of blown. It's like, that's crazy. But I kind of agree with it because this is just my personal beliefs. I still respect and love all people. Like I talked about in previous videos, my religion's Christian, and the philosopher that came up with this philosophy was Christian. However, this can be interpreted by different people different ways. So, absolute idealism, even though Hegel, W.F. Hegel was Christian, what he's trying to do, and similar to my personal beliefs with Christian, he was trying to say the higher conscious and connect people from multiple religions together in unity instead of arguing. I think that's what his main goal was. So it can be interpreted multiple ways by multiple people, but so whatever your religious affiliation is, it can be kind of interpreted as that higher consciousness. And if you don't have an affiliation, it can kind of be seen as one giant brain, one giant mind, if you will. So yeah, that's a good way to explain it as well. So yeah, that being said, basically this suggests that absolute consciousness is a ongoing process throughout history, and that the absolute realizes itself through people. And this is when I first was like, maybe, but then I was like, if the absolute's all like knowing, why does it need people to realize itself? I feel like the absolute spirit can realize itself through people, but doesn't need people to realize itself, if that makes sense. It can realize itself through the consciousness of people, but the absolute spirit wouldn't need people to realize itself. That's one contradiction I had, but so basically this suggests the absolute spirit is a progression throughout history, and it starts to realize itself through people, and the spirit can be seen through society growing and developing, which is kind of wholesome. Basically, the spirit can be seen through society developing, growing, and becoming better, hopefully morally better throughout history. So that's one way to look at it, an absolute spirit. Another thing is mind over matter. It suggests that everything in reality we see is made from the consciousness of the absolute, the mind of the absolute, and people come from the mind of the absolute, and basically everything comes from the mind of the absolute, it suggests. And at the beginning of history, the consciousness, the absolute, didn't realize itself, but as people slowly started to understand themselves and society grew, the absolute started to realize itself through this growth and development, and will continue to realize itself until the end of time, basically, as it suggests. It's kind of intense, but it will find at the end of time, the absolute will completely realize itself, is what it suggests. So that's the mind over matter part. Then we got to talk about how reality is the absolute, it suggests. Third part, reality is a coherent system. It suggests that the way the absolute's revealed, we get closer to the absolute spirit, the knowledge of the absolute spirit is through something called the dialectical method. And that is, a thesis is presented, an antithesis is presented, and then there's a synthesis. And it suggests we get closer to knowing more the actual truth of life through the process of not knowing the truth. The process of constant conflicts in life and arguments and over disagreements of opinions, when the resolutions of those disagreements get us closer to the actual truth of what reality, the truth, meaning of life is through disagreements, and through combining two opposing thoughts and making them one opposing thoughts. I thought this was kind of cool because how I suggested, like, I thought about one of my philosophy videos, truth is subjective and objective, two conflicting thoughts that both can exist at the same time. This kind of suggests that two conflicting thoughts can both exist at the same time and be true. So that's that part of it. And it suggests these conflictions, a mind that's more closer to the absolute spirit, or the knowledge of reality, all reality, is one that's accepts its conflictions as potential for growth and finding ways to connect two opposing ideas and make them whole. And that's getting closer to the absolute truth of reality. And as history goes on, we're getting closer to that, hopefully that moral, the actual truth of reality. We're getting closer to the actual truth of reality as history progresses, this philosophy suggests. And it suggests that true knowledge comes not from choosing one opinion or over another opposing opinion, but finding the balance. And true knowledge comes from the realization that both opposing opinions are important for the progression of history in the future, and that true knowledge comes from trying to find a combination between two conflicting ideas. And that is the key to society's progression. And getting closer to the truth is that not choosing one side or the other, but realizing the duality of life, basically, is the key to getting closer to the actual truth, that two conflicting opinions can both be true and are needed for each other to exist. The viewer and the object aren't different from each other, and that the viewer, the people, and reality that we view, and opinions and subjective opinions all come from one consciousness, the absolute consciousness. So there's no difference between our thoughts and the absolute consciousness, or the absolutes, and there's no difference between our thoughts and the absolute spirits, absolute consciousness thoughts. And anything we see in reality is just an expression of the mind of the absolute consciousness, which is kind of mind-blowing. So then it suggests that most problems in life come from not trying to rely on one's own consciousness rather than the consciousness of reality. Trying to differentiate, most problems in life come from trying to differentiate from trying to put one's own consciousness over the absolute consciousness. And they disconnect from the absolute consciousness, the reality's consciousness, the overall consciousness, and trying to put your consciousness over that consciousness, if that makes sense. And then your understanding over the reality's understanding of life. And that is when most problems suggest that happen in life occur. And then through self-examination and examining other people's actions and opinions, we get thesis, antithesis. We get closer to the synthesis, the dialectical method of becoming closer to the actual truth, the actual reality, and the more, hopefully more moral as history goes on. However, one could argue, I don't know, sometimes we get a little bit more moral and a little bit less moral. So, but one would argue that's the key to absolute idealism, is getting more moral, getting less moral, then eventually, hopefully, getting more moral as a society at the end. Yeah, in conclusion, let me know how you guys feel about this theory. I'm not sure if I 100% agree with that, like maybe 80%. I believe that they're just my personal beliefs. I still respect and love all people, like I said earlier, but as a Christian, I believe that if there is an absolute spirit or consciousness, it's God. And I do agree with most things said. I don't think the absolute spirit would need people to realize itself, though. I feel like if it was the absolute spirit being all-knowing would already know itself. It could realize itself through, it could see its spirit play out throughout history, potentially. Maybe that's what he meant when he said, I don't know. But it could see its spirit play out potentially throughout history and realize its own self through history and through people, but doesn't need to understand itself. At least just in my opinion. I could be wrong. In my opinion. So that's doesn't need people to, in my opinion, doesn't need the absolute spirit, wouldn't need people to realize itself. It could just realize itself, without people. Also, and that's so it also suggests that consciousness and reality is directly linked, and that everything seen in this world and every individual thought is comes from an ultimate consciousness. I do agree with that part of it. Everything we see in this world comes from a thought, the mind of an ultimate consciousness. Everything we see comes from the mind of an ultimate consciousness, and that everything we think is at least partially coming from an ultimate consciousness. We have our own consciousness, but part of our consciousness comes from the absolute consciousness. I can kind of see that could make sense, So I kind of see that it kind of makes sense. Method, I do believe as society grows, we can see the absolute spirit work and become more moral, and we get closer to the absolute truth and reality, because throughout history we've had more breakthroughs in science and stuff as well. So that makes sense that society is getting closer to the truth through questioning themselves and questioning other people's behaviors. I agree with that. So I agree with most of it. I think it's pretty interesting. I think the only thing I don't 100% agree with is that the ultimate consciousness would need people. It can realize itself through people, but doesn't need people to realize itself. But yeah, I think reality could have been created through the ultimate consciousness mindset, the absolute consciousness. Yeah. So hope you found this interesting. I thought this was a pretty cool theory. Probably agree with like 80%. But yeah, that was pretty interesting. As always, thanks again for watching. Like, subscribe if you want. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.